Today we'll be talking about career resource management. My name is Sean Taggart. I'm a commercial corporate student here at Liberty. And today's discussion will be talking about career resource management, the history of it, the different processes that go along with it, and how it has changed over time as the FAA has looked at it and adjusted it for the time. The first thing we're going to talk about is ADM. So ADM is aeronautical decision making, and this is a broader term that relates to career resource management. And what ADM has to deal with, the definition is decision making in a unique environment aviation. It is a systematic approach to the mental process used by pilots and consistently determine the best course of action in response to a given set of circumstances. And the key that I look for in that is the consistency to determine the best course of action, because aviation and pilots in specific are always changing, always making new decisions, and so you have to be able to think on your feet and make sound decisions throughout stressful times. And so some history of aeronautical decision making. Over the past 25 years, it has related to different processes that have to do with pilot judgment and how that relates to good and bad decisions and different accidents. And that has to all do with career resource management. And before we talk about career resource management, we're going to talk about risk management. And like I said beforehand, all these different topics relate to career resource management. All right, so risk management. Risk management, like it sounds like, you're constantly adapting and identifying potential risks or hazards throughout, before, after, and during flights in our situation. And there's different decision-making processes that have to do with controlling risks and managing them throughout the flight. First step in identifying different risks is your personal attitudes and hazardous. So as pilots, let's write attitudes. As pilots, we are constantly have to be self-aware throughout our careers and be able to recognize what our weaknesses are as pilots and to see how we can get better throughout each flight and the course of our career. And one of the main keys of that is to identify different personal potential hazards that we have, being macho pilots, making too great of risks, being potentially scared throughout flights. And so you just have to know yourself as a person and talk to other pilots and see what you potentially may fall under. And the second step is learning behavior modification techniques. And so how do you best learn? How do you best learn as a pilot? And so one of the main keys to being successful in aviation is knowing how you can adapt and learn to certain things. Not everyone's the same, and so knowing how you learn and recognizing that is important. And the last two steps are recognizing and coping with stress and developing risk assessment skills. Those two main steps are a big part of career resource management. Coping with stress in the cockpit is a big issue as far as how different pilots react to one another. If a pilot potentially causes stress for another, it could make a dangerous situation even worse. And also vice versa, if a pilot shrugs things off and they don't think it is a big deal, it can potentially put hazards and make them not as important as they should be. So now on to crew resource management. There's crew resource management and single pilot resource management. And so The main difference, obviously, is a crew versus single pilot. As a single pilot, how do you adapt and deal with changes, stresses, fatigue, different things throughout a flight? Crew resource management is different in the fact that how do you deal with that and work with a partner to mitigate risk, mitigate hazards, and to recognize different strengths and weaknesses throughout the flight. Different main keys to good crew resource management is automation management. This has been a big thing throughout the past 10 to 20 years, is how do people get complacent with technology. Obviously, it has been huge to the fact that it has helped aviation grow and continue to advance, but also it has brought along different hazards and different potential risks that weren't there beforehand because of complacency with pilots. So I'll talk about key with automation management. Other things that are big issues is CFIT awareness and situational awareness. CFIT is controlled flight into terrain, and that also goes hand in hand with automation management. You may think you're on the correct course and rely on your instruments and your technology versus your instincts and your hard work throughout your career, and so that could be a potential risk or hazard that is associated with automation management. All right. The next main thing that has to do with crew resource management is hazards and risks that are associated with working with pilots. A hazard is a real or perceived condition, event, circumstance that a pilot encounters. And a risk is an assessment of a single or cumulative hazard, and so they go hand in hand. Why recognizing risks before they turn into hazards is so important is because of how I talked about that increased stress level that pilots will run into. And so different things that go along with crew resource management, one pilot might see a potential situation as a risk, another may not. How do you deal with that as a crew to come to the safest and best economical decision for your company that you're flying with? Obviously, the airlines don't make money when the airplanes are on the ground, but also safety is a main priority in the airlines, and so how do you balance that and make the smart and safe decision for everything? All right. And now I'm going to talk about the history of crew resource management. And so this has been a key topic for the past 30 years or so because it was an issue early on in the later 1900s with pilots and their first officers with crew resource management or lack thereof. Before crew resource management was really emphasized, head captains had the ultimate say on whether things were done or not, and they took full advantage of that. Usually this resulted in a more hazardous crew environment, and it was not safe, and different accidents came up from this example of where a first officer would say something, a captain would ignore it, and it would be a serious issue because they were not working together as a team. Rather, it was the captain and then the first officer was down here. He did his job. He was not supposed to say anything the captain did was wrong or anything like that. They just had to work together in a positive manner without stepping on the captain's toes, where today it's a much more even playing field. Obviously, the captain does have that ultimate say, but they have emphasized in the airlines working together as a team, outweighing risks and hazards, and working together to come to a sound decision. Also, new systems are in place to where if a first officer does see a potential hazard with a captain being overly strong, there are now things in place where he can talk to chief officers and different people in the airlines to go over that captain's performance and try to work with the company to get rid of that. And so when I'm saying, I'll write out the different hazardous attitudes, because this has a huge impact on crew resource management, as I talked about earlier. The first one, anti-authority. The main key with that is thinking rules exist, but not for me. Don't tell me what to do. And so that's obviously a big reason, because there are obviously very many different rules placed in aviation, so pilots don't go overboard on their decision making throughout each flight. There's impulsivity. How that has to deal with crew resource management is making decisions too quickly, recognizing you do have time in different situations, and basically the issue with that is doing things quickly and rash versus taking their time. The third one is invulnerability. The main issue with that is, oh, that's happened, but it can't happen to us. I'm a good pilot. It can't happen to me, and ignoring the fact that anything is possible in aviation. Obviously, that has to deal with a lot of different issues in the airlines as far as different accidents where pilots assume things where they shouldn't have, and you should assume that things can happen to you and that you should act accordingly. Next is macho. Macho is just like it sounds. I can do it. Different crosswind landings, different captains thinking, oh yeah, this may go overboard our limits of the airplane, but I've done it before in training or in simulators, and just doing the easy or the hard way rather than picking the safer option. And so you have to notice that taking chances is foolish, and that's where a first officer has to be able to talk to a captain on his decision and be able to talk him through that. And the last and potentially the most dangerous one, I think, is resignation. And so this one is what's the use, I give up. And you find this usually in newer pilots, but it can happen with anyone as far as thinking you're helpless throughout a flight. Maybe you've had a stressful day, stressful flight, and it comes to the point where they give up, they don't trust their skills. And so when it comes to that, you want to make sure that you trust your training, trust your partner, rely on your partner, be able to talk to them and see, hey, I'm having a rough day, I'm not feeling great, can you take over the controls, I'll watch the radios, different things like that. Having that difficult discussion where people may not want to give up the controls, or it may come to that point, but you have to be able to talk to your partner through that. And so I'm just going to flip this so you guys can see my different bullet points. All right. So I know it's backwards. We have aeronautical decision making, the risk management process, different attitudes, and I talked about these later. Anti-authority, impulsivity, invulnerability, macho, and resignation. And then different automation management and learning skills that pilots must attest to. And so the key to this whole lesson is recognizing different hazards and knowing that as a captain and a first officer, you are a team, you are to work as a team. And if, say, the first officer is struggling with that, or there is a collision there, knowing that you guys can talk to management in the airlines, and there are systems and people in place to help mitigate these risks. And the FAA is just basically pushing for a more sterile cockpit, a more business-like, but also more enjoyable cockpit and experience to where the pilots enjoy working together and they are safe throughout their decisions. Thank you.